Trish and Rob McGregor welcome you to a place where all kinds of phenomena flourish. Voices whisper ancient secrets, signs and symbols are abundant. UFOs, ETs, ghosts, and even the dead move about freely. Here we meet authors, researchers, and investigators of the mysterious, the strange, and of the inexplicable anomalies that surround us. Step out of the everyday world and take a journey into the mystical underground.
Welcome to the Mystical Underground. Thank you for joining us. This is Rob McGregor.
And Trish McGregor.
And our producer and tech magician, John Posey. You can go to themysticalunderground.com where we make regular blog posts and where you can find out about our books. Among them are Phenomena, Harnessing Your Psychic Abilities, The Secrets of Spirit Communication, Sensing the Future, and Aliens in the Backyard. Our most recent book is called The Shift, Reports from the Mystical Underground. Trish's latest novel is White Crows, and Rob's seventh Indiana Jones novel, The Staff of Kings, is now available in ebook and audio, and this one is free. Trish?
Our guest today is Salicrow, a psychic medium and author who weaves the traditions of her Irish Traveler and Blackfoot heritage with modern magical techniques. For more than 30 years, she has worked as a spirit channel, seer, and intuitive healer, offering readings and teaching workshops throughout the United States and internationally. Salicrow's new book is called Spirit Speaker, A Medium's Guide to Death and Dying. It's also an excellent guide to the afterlife, which we'll be talking about. Welcome, Sally, the witch of the North Kingdom.
The Northeast Kingdom. Yes.
The Northeast Kingdom, okay.
Thank you for having me.
Yes. So when did you first know you were a medium?
I am a person who was born into a family with psychic abilities. So my great-grandmother was my first teacher. And I knew the spirits talked to me my whole life. I started working professionally as a medium when I was 30 after having a very large opening that I refer to as the November incident. I wrote about that in my first book, Jump Girl. And so kind of got the benefit of being raised psychic and knowing about it and being comfortable with it. And then having that volume turned from like 10 to 100 when I was about 30 years old.
What happened then?
Well, I'd already been working as a psychic reader with doing divination and precognitive readings since I was 18. So for like, over a decade already. And I had a full spiritual opening when I was 30 in which my team of spirits started talking to me very clearly, teaching me. They taught me a lot of lessons. Some of them were pretty difficult, but every time they would teach me something challenging, they would remind me that it was my idea. And I knew when they said it that it was true.
It's your idea.
It's why I named my first book Jump Girl, because I say that I'm the type of person who will often stand on the edge and count to 3 and jump and then find my way out of a situation instead of wading in. But I say I jump in to help other people wade in. Like I'll jump in and then find the shallows and the easier way in for others.
Well, I think it helps to have a supportive family from some of the psychics we've spoken to, for sure.
Yeah, my sister is also psychic. So I not only had my great-grandmother when I was growing up, I have a sister who's a year and a half younger than me, and we both have psychic gifts. So if one of us saw something, the other one did as well. So it was easy to get confirmation that your experience was real. And both of us can teach in the psychic field. So
Does she live in Vermont?
She does. She lives, we live very close to each other. And I have a educational center and psychic artisans guild in the town of St. Johnsbury, Vermont. And my sister also works out of my space.
That's cool. Well, you say you approach the mediumship through the path of the healer. What does that mean exactly? Can you explain it?
the simplest way of putting it is that I wouldn't do haunted house tours because I would be more concerned with helping the spirit who is distressed to cross over than I would off of having other people be able to have a
Right.
psychic experience. It's my own personal, way of looking at things that came from my upbringing, but also I have my Reiki master's in 6 schools of Reiki. I've been a vocal toner, sound healer for 20 years. Most of my clients, I started in this really small rural area, and my reputation just allowed it to grow and grow and grow. So a lot of people who are my clients are everyday people, and they really trust me and rely on me. And so my approach has always been in healing. So I work with families when they are grieving. I work with people who are coming. I work with the beloved dead primarily. I do some work with haunted houses, but in that case, it's more about helping the living in the house and the spirit to find an agreement or to help those spirits cross over if they're distressed. But I don't do it for entertainment purposes. Like, it's all really deep. And often I'll work with whole families.
You mean that live in the house? Are you talking about,
I'm talking about like when somebody comes to see me for spirit communication, I allow people to record me. And then usually what ends up happening is more and more family members come back because my information is really accurate. And in the case of deaths that are traumatizing, I often usually work with family members in my role of a healer through Reiki and sound healing.
Do you ever get overwhelmed?
There have definitely been times, and I've had to work really hard. I worked really hard on psychic self-defense when I was in my 20s, before I started doing spirit communication publicly, just when I was doing psychic readings for people publicly, because you're still looking at really deep things. And so when I was in my 20s, I owned a metaphysical shop and I owned a bar.
Oh boy, what a combination.
It was a lot for me. It pushed my
a lot of spirits in that bar. Huh?
Yeah, for sure. But also it really pushed that part of me that was empathic to almost, that breaking point, which is actually why I ended up studying Reiki. When I first started doing Reiki, it was for my own self. It was for psychic self-defense. And my Reiki master laughed at me and told me that Reiki had a mind of its own. And I immediately started doing healing work as soon as I learned Reiki. And like I said, I've now been practicing healing arts for like 25 years of my life. So,
what sign are you? I'm just curious.
I'm a Gemini.
Are you?
Yeah.
May or June?
It's May. I'll be 52 on May 29th. So it's interesting because I do numerology as well. And so this is a 7-year in numerology. But I'm also going to be a 7 number because I'm going to be 52 and my birth number is a 7. So I'm like,
oh, interesting.
Hey, that's stuff happening this year.
Yeah, good year.
Sally, you encourage people to make contact with the other side. You give them in your book ways of making that contact. Do you suggest that people use any type of protective invocation or anything to avoid lower entities that might come into their way?
Well, I encourage people in Spirit Speaker, I encourage them to create relationships with their beloved dead. And in doing so, we have a natural resonance with our beloved dead that doesn't require us to have to protect ourselves from negative entities. It's like all of us have our grandma come to visit. All of us have our, maybe our spouse or something near us. I like to look at it through our luminosity. Everybody has at least the light of like a tea light candle that allows their beloved dead to come to them and to be close to them. And that's what I focus on in the book when I'm telling people about opening up to spirit. When I'm training people in spirit communication, I talk about first getting a spirit that I refer to as the doorman, because again, I owned a bar. So the doorman says, you can come in, you need to stay here, I'll pass a message for you, or you need to go away. It's your trusted companion on the other side. But that's more for people who are looking to do spirit communication as more than talking to their own family members who've passed.
Do you have a bartender?
Yeah. I do not. I think that's probably me. I'm the one that's usually in control of the show.
So what about the other way around? The beloved dead contacting us? What are the ways that they can contact us, that they do contact us?
Well, there's a lot of ways that spirits contact us, and all spirits, like you don't die and get this manual that says this is the best way for you to communicate. Okay.
That's good.
They have to kind of figure it out on their own, what way works best for them. So some spirits are really good at it, and some spirits are not. So when we go, for example, to a medium, maybe you've gone to like a gallery where there's a medium giving readings to, some of the people in the crowd. And one reading might be so spot on and filled with detail, and the next one might still be accurate, but not as, flavorful. And partially that's because spirits don't all communicate as well as each other. So, different spirits have different techniques that they use, but a person who is good at communicating in life is most likely going to be a good communicator in death. And a person who really struggles with communication in life is going to have a harder time with communication in death. So just keeping that in mind, it can mean that some spirits are just better at doing it than others. But common ways that they communicate, music is one. A lot of us have felt a song come on the radio and then felt somebody with us. And I like to talk about that one because I tell people it has nothing to do with the DJ. Okay. So it's not that the DJ is being told to play this song, because if they were, they'd be paid a lot more money than they are. It's more
synchronicity.
It's synchronicity and it's opportunistic. Spirits are opportunistic. So what happens is if you're in the car and this song comes on that, was a song that was between you and somebody else, that spirit, if they're with you, is going to push their energy at you so that you feel them at the same time that you're hearing that song. And if you respond like, ooh, even if you just like, they notice it. And so they will use that pattern again. That's why spirits will get into these patterns of how they communicate. And it has to do with their personalities. Some of the easiest ways for spirit to communicate is through our olfactory senses, our sense of smell. Okay. Because we're very sensitive to that. We can smell something, like it's springtime here. You can smell a scent of, damp earth and brings you back to being, 15 years old and being out in the woods with your friend. The spirits use that same kind of concept. So they will often give us the smell of something and it will make us think of them. So like maybe you smell cigarette smoke, but you don't smoke. And you immediately think of your brother, Bob, and then you react. And again, they know that you reacted to it. So they're going to use that again and again. Dreams, spirits often will communicate with us in our dreams. And when that happens, it is usually a moment that we know we're not dreaming, so the dream feels more, often there's some kind of moment in which we're seeing the person and we realize they're dead,
That's the kind of contact I've had with beloved dead in dreams, and it's like a very vivid dream, a flash that happens, and there's the person. One particular one was just a message in the same kind of voice the person spoke in in life, and he had a kind of a way about him, and he said, "Hi, Rob, I'm dead now." You know, it was just kind of,
Yeah.
and
Sometimes
like
it's
a week
simple.
later, I hadn't been in contact with the guy for a couple of years, and then about a week later, I heard that he had died in a car wreck.
Yeah.
Mm.
That's interesting too, because the time right after death is when most spirits have the most, or most people are going to experience contact is within the few weeks after death. And it has to do with that person who has just passed into spirit, kind of like still having a close connection to the living world
Mhm.
and still having a closer connection to that, how that energy works. And, so the couple weeks after somebody passes is usually when a lot of people might experience a visitation from that spirit.
How about loud sounds, loud noises?
You have noises. Sometimes they'll make a noise. I wrote about that in my first book, Jump Girl. Again, that was a memoir of my life growing up psychic and of my opening. And in that book, before I had my major opening, one of the things that happened was a loud sound that the spirit Adam, who I've worked with for years now, at the time I didn't know what it was. My husband and I were coming back from being out. We had the kids in the back seat asleep. And all of a sudden we heard this really loud, and so loud that we pulled over because we thought something had happened to the tire, had something happened in the back seat. Nothing had happened. And then shortly after that, a lot of things started happening.
Your husband thought, "Uh-oh, what am I living with?"
Yeah, well, he is a very solid person. I'm really thankful for that because we'd already been together. We've been together for 33 years now. So we met when we were like 18 and 19, and he knew that I was psychic. He knew that that I did these things. Yes, the experience was outside of ordinary, but it wasn't completely shocking for the path that I was already taking because I have always deeply pursued the psychic arts.
Yeah.
Let me ask you a question. What about when Rob and I were sitting in our rooms or our offices or off the family room, and I was writing to a friend who had just lost his wife, and I just heard about it. And suddenly there was this huge explosion. I mean, it sounded like a transformer blowing in the family room. And so I wrote him, I said, "Oh my God, you're not gonna believe what happened." He goes, "That's her. She stirred up trouble in the afterlife." And I thought,
Yeah.
it scared the dog off the
It
couch.
takes a lot of energy for spirits to do something like that. So they usually only do it when they have great need and they're really trying to get somebody's attention. Because it does the way that spirit gets energy is there's two ways. One is if you are in a space that has a lot of ley lines around it, that's going to give them a source. That's why more people have spiritual experiences like near a stone circle than they do, at Wendy's.
Yes.
You know what I mean? And the other way is through a medium. So sometimes that medium is not a developed medium and is just a battery, like a lot of untrained mediums are people who, when you have it as a natural ability, spirit communication or spirit activity is going to happen around you, and if you have a house that's haunted and no one living in it has any ability as a medium, nothing will happen. If you move one person with that ability into the house, everybody in the house can have an experience because the medium is being used as a battery. And that medium will often be tired and run down because their energy is constantly being tapped. And when we train ourselves, then we can learn to be the one that's in control of that energy on whether or not spirit uses it and when. I don't have to be woken up in the middle of the night because that is the spirit. I'm not going to talk to you.
Go away.
Right. You got to make it a comfortable thing for me as well.
Now, what is a spirit's purpose in communicating with the living? Is it just to say hi? I mean, what are they learning?
Sometimes there's a lot of people who are alive right now who are working on what I consider family curses, those generational damaging things like alcoholism and poverty and, abuse. And there's a lot of people who are living right now who are breaking those patterns. And there are spirits on the other side that are also attached to that family that are actively helping them to break those patterns, to heal those family lines. So it depends on the spirit. Sometimes the spirit just comes through for visitation. I often say, like, in my professional work, I'm a psychic medium by trade. I'm an author as a secondary thing. And I do about 20 hours of client-based work a week. And what I find is that it is kind of like being a guest at other people's family reunions. A lot of times it's people coming together. If your relative was really funny, then your spirit communication funny session will probably be funny. People will be laughing, because they will show their personality. And that's really what a lot of people come for, is they just want to connect with that person again that they love. They not only want to know that they're okay, but they want to know that that spirit is looking out for them. And the spirits do that. Often spirits will talk about things that, like I have had people so many times, I'll tell them something and they're like, oh my God, we were just talking about that in the car on the way over. And I'm like, yeah, I know, they were with you. That's why they're telling you this. Or, sometimes the spirits do come through for those bigger reasons to help family members when they're in need or when they're changing a destructive family pattern.
What about animals? I'm sorry, Rob.
Okay.
But what about animals?
How
does that work
with animals? I can, but it's not where, like, I don't really work with animals. Animals have a tendency to reincarnate quicker. Sometimes people will even experience having the same spirit of an animal more than once because the animals don't have as much,
baggage.
Baggage, yeah, for sure. They don't have as much baggage. Although sometimes an animal, particularly if it was a really beloved pet, will be waiting for a person when they cross, because there's been times when that animal has been talked about by spirit, where another spirit is telling me that they have this dog with them as well, and that the dog is so-and-so's, and I know that dog is going to hang out until the people get there. But I don't do animal communication as part of my psychic work. I primarily, I really primarily see myself as a healer in everything that I do. Like I have a lot of counselors and therapists, psychiatrists as clients. And I even worked in a therapist's building because they asked me to come work there because, but I found it too boring for me. I was like, I don't want to be this really quiet and dull here, not working.
Well, Sally, do spirits miss being alive, do you think?
They miss parts of being alive. Some of them are happy to be in spirit because life was really hard for them. But spirits do miss things about life. They miss food. They miss drinks. They miss smoke. They, they miss sex, but they don't talk about that as much. But sometimes I do work with couples, like when somebody's passed and I have to be like, I'll say things like, well, I can tell that you had a very frisky relationship.
Yeah.
But
that's
they talk
funny.
about food and drink a lot. They're especially around the holidays.
Okay. No sex on the other side, though?
I don't think it's the same. They actually describe it as looking like fireworks.
Okay.
Huh.
Buzzing each other, huh?
Yeah, I think that there's a different kind of intimacy when we cross into spirit, because we can actually lose ourselves or step out of being just, well, first of all, when we die, we become all that we are. I believe in reincarnation, and the spirits I've communicated with, that's how they describe it, is you become all that you are. So every life that you have been, you are. You're that higher consciousness when you're in spirit. And then you can also kind of like blend. Some spirits choose to become more part of that collective consciousness, whereas others really like to hold on to the story of who they are.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask you about. It seems like that spirits, to evolve more, would get away from the earth energy and move on elsewhere.
Depends on the spirit. Some of the spirits are very much, they like it. Like, I consider myself that. I like the earth plane. Even though I'm a very spiritual person, I really enjoy the physical plane. And I really like being in that border between the two. You know, a medium exists in that betwixt and between, which means that you are more in the spirit world than the average person.
What about how long? How do people figure out when to come back and to whom? Does it vary?
I don't really know that part, to be quite honest. Like, when if they reincarnate quicker, if they are really working on something and they're very passionate about it. It takes longer for souls that are, who have damage or have, damaged, self-damage, damaged others, been damaged by others. They might take longer before they're ready for it. Some spirits, my uncle, for example, reincarnated really quickly. It was a really strange thing. I had an uncle who I say he was here on a vacation life. Like, he never got married. He never had kids. He was a good guy. People loved him. He didn't have anybody he did wrong. Do you know what I mean? Not a lot of karma. And he died young, about 42. And then he reincarnated almost immediately, but then he died again like 2 years later. It was that I think that sometimes when we are higher souls or we've had that benefit, we might volunteer to come back as a child who doesn't live long, which is what I think my uncle did. Like, he had this really easy life, and then he had a life of, dying young, and then he was back in spirit. And, so there's definitely not a set pattern for it. I think.
Did you recognize him?
What happened was, I knew that he had reincarnated because I had spoken to him shortly after his death, and then I knew spirit told me that he had moved on. And when my father moved back home, my father also had abilities, but he didn't embrace them till he was much older, until he was 60 years old, because my dad had gone to war. He was in Vietnam. So there was a lot of reasons he used his abilities and didn't feel comfortable with them. And shortly after he started opening up himself, one day I came home, and he was at my house, and my dad was like, I've been talking to Ted, which is his brother. I'm like, Dad, you can't be talking to Ted. Ted's already moved on. And all of a sudden, my uncle was in my head, and he was like, actually, Sally. I was like,
God.
So yeah, I have a very unusual experience in that working with spirit in one form or another has been pretty normal most of my life. And
that's great.
Yeah, it's definitely made things easier, and it's made it so, I've been teaching for many years. I was teaching for a long time before I started writing, because I felt that in many ways the upbringing I had was necessary so that I could help other people, because we are living in this time of psychic evolution where people are waking up and opening up and having
Boy, that's for sure.
And if you don't have any, any understanding of what that is, it can be incredibly scary.
That's a good point. That's what our book, The Shift, is about. That the whole thing, everything's shifting.
Yeah.
This awareness is just, it's incredible.
And
it is incredible. It's really fun to watch.
Yeah.
Right. More and more people are tuning in, being psychic, and who had never thought about it before.
Yeah.
And then there's a climate change aspect too that's going on.
Well, I think that they go hand in hand. My second book, which was The Path of Elemental Witchcraft, was a book that came out last May. I had 2 books that came out within a year of each other. And in that book, it was all about communicating and working with elemental spirits and, needing to develop this understanding of our connection with the natural world, so what you're talking about, Rob, with climate change is like, I don't think it's a coincidence that we're becoming more psychic. No. I think we need to be if we're going to survive, because we have to start thinking differently. And the only way we can think differently is to experience life differently. Because if you experience that everything has a consciousness, you have to start.
It changes everything.
Responsibilities.
Yeah, it changes everything. I think it's interesting that your family has discussions, not discussions, but disagreements about whether or not your uncle came back. That's fascinating. That's fascinating.
And I've argued with my spirits. I wrote about that in my first book, like simple things. Like I remember one time it was Christmas time and I needed a parking spot, and I asked my guide to find me a parking spot, and he told me to turn down this lane, and I'm like, there is no parking spot there. I don't know what you're talking about. And then somebody backed out. And I was like, okay, you're right. You're right. But yeah, I think that part of it is just that understanding that spirits, especially when you're talking about the spirits of the beloved dead, these are, in many ways, you have to treat them like you would the living, I can ignore spirits easier than other people because, if you're in the grocery store, you don't feel the need to talk to every living person you see. And so I treat it the same way with spirit, that just because I see you doesn't mean I have to interact with you. Like it's a matter of choice. And I think that is, part of what we're all learning that now, especially as we're opening up empathically, that just because I feel you, just because I sense you doesn't mean I have to own this or react to this. It's all part of that opening or that shift, as you guys like to put it.
Mm-hmm. I have a question about when my mother died. She had a marriage with my father for decades. It was about bringing up the family. And then after he died, she had another relationship that was kind of a fun relationship that lasted maybe 10, 12 years or something like that before he died. So I was wondering, when she died, did they both meet her there?
Yes.
How's that work?
Yeah, they do. Well, we don't have the same level of our emotions. So our emotions get turned down when we die. That's, this is a good segue for that, because if we look at our emotions and on a volume dial, like on the radio of 0 to 10, most people go through life with their emotions set at about a 3 or a 4. People with anxiety and depression will have their volume set at as high as an 8 or a 9, which means that they're literally drowning in their emotions. Because if we had to listen to our music that loud all the time without a break, we would have a hard time feeling sane. And when we die, our emotions get turned down to about a 2. So jealousy isn't really as big of a thing in death, because you're able to see how somebody loves differently. So yes, often people will have more than one spouse waiting for them when they pass. They don't have to get rid of one because of that. That connection.
That sense of jealousy is not there then?
The jealousy is not there because remember, if your emotions are turned down to like a 2 and you're able to see all the perspectives, that's the other part. So when we die, we're able to see all the perspectives. We're able to see what the other people are actually thinking and feeling. And, it's freeing for a lot of people. They spend a lot of time reviewing their lives and seeing what was really going on instead of what maybe they felt was going on.
Okay, I have a question. What is the afterlife like? I mean, what does it look like? What do you do there? What, are there activities?
Well, I certainly didn't get a guidebook, so I can tell you what I know, and that's all I can tell you. Some spirits, like I said, they spend a lot of time reviewing different pieces of their lives and who they were. So, and they can do that from multiple perspectives. So it's kind of like a really interesting television experience. Some of them work as guides. A lot of evolved spirits do. They choose to be actively involved with people who are living. And, you know, like some spirits hold more on to wanting to have a home or a physical domain. Like, one of my husband's spirits that I communicate with because he lives in my house, is every time you talk to him, he will meet you in his office. He was one of his lives, he was a doctor in the late 1800s, and he has this oak office, or maybe it's other wood, I don't know. I just know it's all wood, like wood cabinets, wood desk, wooden walls, glass and wood, and he likes to meet you there because he really loved that space. So my dad was a person who, when he was alive, would call me from California to ask me, you know, questions kind of like what you asked, Trish. Like, do spirits sit in chairs? And I'm like, well, if they want to sit in chairs, they can, but they're not sitting in it because they're fatigued.
Right.
You know,
But isn't it also true that what people think they're going to experience, that they will experience? For example, if you were a very religious person and went to church or temple every week, and then after you died, you thought that you'd continue going to church, and that was what you would find a church there, and
they probably would create it for themselves.
Right. And then they kind of wake up after that to realize that's really not necessary.
Right. Most of them, well, when we become all that we are, though, and that happens when we die, we get to see all the different aspects of it. I also think that time isn't the same when we're dead. So,
right.
Like when we have to wait 40 years because our, husband died 40 years before us, that's different for the spirit, the husband. That 40 years could go by really quickly because they're not stuck in that linear time. It's like I, as a medium, don't even really believe in past lives as much as I believe in parallel lives. So I think that sometimes that time in between lives is really might seem like 500 years here, but is really compressed when you're in spirit form. Different spirits have different roles. Some spirits are very involved in the evolution of human consciousness, and there's a lot of spirits who are working right now. So a lot of more people are working with their spirit guides than, in a very, very long time. I won't say forever, because I think that psychic consciousness is on a pendulum swing, and that we are in a time where we're opening more up again. But we certainly know that it wasn't that long ago that it was really repressed, and that if you showed any sign of this, you were persecuted. So right now, there's a lot of spirit guides who are actively working because a lot of people are ready for that opening in their consciousness, and you kind of need a guide helping you through that.
I thought it was interesting that in your readings with the deceased, that you've yet to come across anyone who's either in hell or heaven.
Yeah. And I have communicated with a lot of Catholic grandmothers.
Okay.
Oh, God.
And go to church every, multiple times a week. And, because I live in an area close to Canada, close to Montreal, actually. So we have more French Canadians, and a lot of, people have Catholic grandmoms. And there's, but the interesting thing is that those people are actually easier to communicate with, because while the afterlife might not have been what they were expecting it to be, they very much believed in spirit and in an afterlife. And so they are easier to communicate with. They might be surprised, that they're communicating through, a witch, but I think that I do a good job of helping everyday people understand what I mean by that word. To me, a witch is a A wise person is a person, and magic is science that hasn't yet been explained.
Right.
And I've worked in this area. I was in the school board for 9 years. I'm a normal person in my community who has these abilities and does these things. And because of that, I've had old ladies and police officers and, therapists, and my clientele is really pretty normal.
And you were not banned from the school board?
No, I was the president of this.
Wow, that's great.
Town.
Yeah, but you're in Vermont. You're in Vermont, though.
Yeah, you're in Vermont too.
Yeah, I'm in Vermont. I live in a very liberal state.
Yeah.
But like when I wrote my first book, I knew people would buy it because it was a memoir. My second book, though, it literally says witchcraft on the front of it. And I was like, I don't know how my clients are going to respond to this. They know this, but I have little old ladies who buy that book, who because
funny.
They trust me, they're willing to read what's in it. And so, I think it's just that I've always introduced myself first as a person who was a involved community member before, I introduced myself as a witch. That just happened to be who I was. And because of that, I have some clients that I've been seeing for 20 years.
Wow.
Oh, yeah.
That's
interesting.
Good. Okay, so do we have any spirits who are working on the politics in this country? Do they ever even dare take that on?
Boy, that's a hard one.
I know it is.
I personally believe that sometimes, I don't want to say that I believe that we are, one of the things that I was told when I had my opening experience by spirit was that, that they talked about that years ago, that there would be a civil war of sorts, that it wouldn't be like the Civil War that we experienced, but that there would be this breaking down of, what our country was and this division between ways of thinking. And so sometimes I think that something is bigger than what we see. Do you know what I mean?
Yes, I know exactly what you mean.
And while I would like to think that they work on politicians, I think that, the politician first has to be able to hear, because just like we know that most people can't hear spirits talking to them, even though the spirits are. The people who are, maybe you guys talked about like the low entity. Those are, if there's spirits speaking to the politicians, I think those are the ones.
The writer Ruth Montgomery back in the 80s wrote a bunch of books about the New Age movement at that time as it was expanding. One of the things she said, there was going to be a New Age president that would come and take us into a better...
Yeah, I haven't felt that yet. I think it's interesting. I just got back from Ireland on Friday night really late, and I did talk politics a couple of times, once in a thrift store and once in a pub, and it was just an interesting concept to see how other people see American politics.
Kind of sad.
Global politics, talking about their own problems and stuff like that. I think that, climate change and climate crisis is going to ruffle a lot of feathers, and we're going to see a lot of collapse. It's one of the reasons why we have to kind of go back to those ways of honoring our beloved dead, creating relationships with our ancestors and the world around us, because we're lost, we're spiritually starving, and we're making poor decisions because of it. Because, I'm not really fond of, organized religion, but I think that one of the problems that we're experiencing is that as organized religion, particularly, the mass rule that Christianity held for many years, as that kind of falls away and people aren't assigned a religion at birth, because that's what happened when I was a kid. It was like it was just assumed that you were Christian. I think that one of the problems happens is that people don't know what to do. And so there's this spiritual starvation, that they don't know how to pray or what they're praying to, and they don't know how to connect to their ancestors, and they don't know how to connect to the earth itself. And while technology allows us to connect people all over the world like we're doing right now, it's in a very there's an emptiness with it.
There's a spiritual void. That's what
void.
Yeah. When our daughter was born, we decided to raise her completely outside of religion, even though Trish and I were both raised as Catholics. And we talked about spirit and our beliefs in the afterlife, but nothing religious. And but she did pick up some things from us in a kind of unusual way, but nothing.
You tell her Tarot story. Okay.
Right, yeah. So she was at the home of a very Christian friend when she was about 8 or 9 years old, and she saw a picture or saw a crucifix on the wall, and she asked the girl and her mother, "Is that the hangman?"
Because I read tarot cards.
Oh, nice.
The woman never spoke to us again.
Yeah. Yeah, we had a similar story in our household that my daughter, when she was in like 5th or 6th grade, she came home and told me she wanted to go to church, and I couldn't figure out why. So I gave her this video first. And turns out that she had thought that Jesus was a cool kid who lived in the next town over, because people would talk about going to church on Sunday and hanging out with Jesus. It's like, but
good.
Same thing. We talked every time my kids had a question, I would try to say, well, this is what some people believe,
right,
and this is what other people believe, and this is what I personally believe, but you can figure out for yourself what it is that you believe. I feel really fortunate in that I've had a lot of experiences in life. So, you don't have to have faith when you have personal experience.
right.
And, most people have to go through life with faith and, and what personal experiences they have, they talk themselves out of. So one of the things I talk about in Spirit Speaker is taking words like maybe, kind of, and think so out of your vocabulary when you're talking about your personal experiences with spirit. So, because people will say like, I saw something out of the corner of my eye and I think it was my grandmother, or I thought I saw something out of the corner of my eye. And I'm like, you either saw something out of the corner of your eye or you didn't.
Exactly.
And then when they say it in the affirmative, I saw something out of the corner of my eye and it was my grandmother. I'm like, okay, so how'd that feel? And they're like, I saw something out of the corner of my eye and it was my grandmother. Like they can feel it when they say it. But when they start, they immediately throw in those doubt words because that's what we've been trained.
Right.
We've been trained to think that our experiences are our imagination, that we have imaginary friends, that, whatever it is. And so most people talk themselves out of the experiences.
Yeah, that's true.
They're not having them.
Yeah. I've been saying recently that I have a spirit guide right at my fingertips because I have this thing on my finger here that looks like a person.
Oh, gosh, it does.
So that's my spirit guide at my fingertips.
What's his name?
Yeah. So we haven't talked about suicides yet. I mean, I think that's an important question that people would be interested in hearing about. What happens?
Yeah, how does that?
Sure.
Yeah.
What does that do?
So going back to my volume dial, of emotions, one of the things that I say first is that when somebody dies by suicide, or overdoses, or dies from cirrhosis of the liver from years of abuse, they are partially responsible for their passing. And I use the word partially because using that analogy of a volume dial, they've been experiencing their emotions at an 8 or a 9 for a very, very long time. And when a person is in that place, it usually makes them make bad decisions, because we know how we can react when we're hungry or when we didn't really sleep good at night. And when we're in those moments, we might be more rash. We might make poor decisions. We might snap at somebody just because they said something in a way we didn't like it. Okay. So when a person is struggling with any kind of mental illness, that volume is so loud that they are exhausted by it, and they're also not going to be making the most, they're not going to be making the best judgment. So when they die due to their own hands in some shape or form, they are put into what I refer to as time out. So thinking about it like the timeout chair, like if a kid's being naughty and you have to sit in the chair and think about their actions, it's kind of the same thing. A person who has passed, being responsible for their own passing is going to be in that timeout space, and their emotions are turned down. Remember, they're given relief. That's the first thing they experience is relief, that they are not at that emotional level anymore. But then they have to watch how their actions affected other people, and they have to review their life and see where things went wrong. Often what they're seeing is how much they were actually loved. They're seeing how their death had devastating effects on other family members. So it's not always an easy thing to watch. And they also, are likely going to have to repeat a similar situation in their next life because they didn't successfully learn whatever lesson it is that they came in to learn. So I try to tell people that, I want to make it really clear that it's still not a good decision. I don't encourage it, but what I'm saying is their soul isn't damned for it. Like that's it.
Because that's the thing the church always,
exactly.
Yeah.
And in my opinion, it's absolutely cruel and unnecessary because not only is it cruel to the person who's passed, but it's cruel to their family to think that that's what's happening to their loved one. And because even without that belief, it is devastating for families. When I work a lot with families who have lost somebody to overdose or suicide, and that's where my role as a healer comes in a lot. Usually in those cases, I end up working with the family multiple times, either through spirit communication or through healing work, because it's so hard to heal when you have lost your child, in particular, has taken their own life or has overdosed because of a addiction. The same feelings of pain and where did I go wrong happen to the living. And that is really hard for the dead to also, because they have to watch that. They have to watch their loved ones suffering because of their loss.
But it's really not the same, though, for suicide who is at the end of their life, maybe having cancer, or they have days or weeks.
You're talking about
deliverance,
assisted suicide.
Right. I mean, we do that to our animals.
Right. Well, in the state of Vermont, we do have that, the Death with Dignity Act, which I wrote about in Spirit Speaker. I took part in she was the third person in the state of Vermont to use the Death with Dignity Act, my friend Breja. And I was part of that death. And I was one of the people who had to sign off that she was mentally stable, making the decision. And I was also one of the people who helped to give her the medication when the time came.
And did you feel her as she passed?
Oh, boy.
I bet.
It was, first of all, it was one of the most beautiful deaths I've ever experienced. And I have been present at multiple deaths. Breja had already had her breasts removed from cancer a couple of years before, and then the cancer came back and she had bone cancer. In the state of Vermont, you have to have permission through, at the time there was only one psychiatrist who could license it. You had to have two friends say that you were in your right mind. So somebody with dementia can't use it, which I find unfortunate. But so we first tried to help her spiritually, like just kind of like she wanted to will herself into passing, and she had a group of druids and friends, fairy seership, magical people with her. And at the end of the weekend, when it was becoming clear that she wasn't going to pass, she knew that she was going to take the medication, and she got up half an hour before she woke everybody else up, because I was sleeping outside of her bedroom, and she wrote love letters to friends who couldn't be there with her. Mm-hmm. And then she let everybody know, and we prepared the medication. And there was, after taking the first medication just helps the second medication to stay down. After taking the second medication, she had a half an hour to live.
Wow.
And during that time, we took photos and hugged and got to say all our goodbyes. And then she got into bed with our druid teacher and her brother on either side of her and the rest of us surrounding her. And we sang her over into spirit. And she was speaking to me within like 5 minutes, 10 minutes of her death.
Wow.
Telling me that I needed to get tea and coffee and snacks out for people who would be coming.
Did other people?
Well, that makes me sad.
Did other people have contact with her too in any different ways, methods, synchronicities?
Everybody felt her.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody could feel her presence, and it was a really beautiful experience. But I was the only one who was psychic.
Wow.
Yeah. You call this the gray area, or the gray? Well, can you explain that a little bit?
Yeah. So the gray is the area that spirits gave me that word to refer to the time in which we are passing and can't get better. And also sometimes when we first crossed into spirit, we're in the gray. And in those cases, a spirit might not know that they have passed over. Also, a spirit that is lost is most likely in the gray, like you can call it limbo. But the living being in the gray, I compare it to pregnancy. So when somebody is pregnant, the living can see that another person is coming in because the mother's belly is growing and giving us that physical sign that a person's coming in. And when somebody's in the gray, they start to show up more in the spirit world. So they're more visible there. And so their spirits, their beloved dead, can prepare and come and kind of gather around them as they're crossing. And a person who is a medium is going to be more in the, also shows up in the gray, but they don't really refer to it as being the same, but it's the same thing. Like, I'm more visible in the spirit world than the average person.
Are your kids also psychic?
Both of my children have some psychic ability. My daughter works as a psychic reader. And my kids have both been Reiki practitioners since they were like 8 and 9 years old.
Wow.
They don't really work on other people as much with that. My son's actually a barber, so that's what he does for a job. But I tell people that that bartenders and hairdressers are psychiatrists.
That's true.
Yeah. You say that
yes, both of my children have some ability.
Yeah, that's great.
You say that all of us have like a light that they can see from the other side to some different strength, different people. So when they're in that gray area near death, does that light expand, that they're easier to find?
That's a good way of putting it. They have more luminosity in the spirit world when they're in the gray. Yeah. And I actually shared one of my favorite stories about that in Spirit Speaker. I did a gallery for a couple hundred women at a resort one year. They do this ladies retreat, and one of the people I called up on stage, I told her that her mother-in-law was coming through, and that the mother-in-law was talking about her husband, which is and that he was currently in a nursing home and that he was going to be crossing soon. So she was talking about her husband being in the gray.
Mhm.
And I was able to give the woman enough information that she knew what I was talking about. The mother-in-law who was passed talked about how they were dancers and that they'd be dancing together again soon. And they had been. They'd been people who did ballroom dancing and stuff like that when they were younger. So it was a retreat. So the next day, the lady came looking for me. I was teaching a class, and she came to tell me that her husband had called because her father was actively dying. So the mother-in-law who had come through the night before saying he's going to be joining me soon, he ended up the next day I got the confirmation that was true. So the story goes on because the next year I did a gallery at the same event, and the daughter came, the lady who I'd read for, so it'd be the granddaughter of who were passing. And she came to tell me that when her grandfather was passing, he had been comatose, and he reached his arms up, and then he started kicking his feet. Wow. And that the family, having received my message, knew that was him dancing with their mom. So
that's great.
That was really just a beautiful moment.
That's a great story.
The spirit will, when somebody's in the gray, they will often experience their dead a lot more. They're become more psychically sensitive during that time, and so do their caregivers.
That's a great story to end it with. John, you've been very quiet.
I could just talk for the next 3 hours. You kidding?
John, are you still alive?
No, I'm still.
Okay.
I'm still in this room, but yeah.
What do you think?
Oh no, yeah.
Any questions?
Well, I do, but I don't think we have time to answer the questions. And I guess just maybe the most straightforward one is beloved dead. I don't think I've heard that phrase before today. Where does that phrase come from?
That has just been what we've called the dead in my family. And beloved dead for me are our family, friends, loved ones, and ancestors, spirit guides. Our beloved dead are our spirit team. So, that's what I specialize in working with. And that's what I teach other people primarily to work with, is their beloved dead. So when you asked earlier, Rob, about, protection, when we're working with our beloved dead, those are the spirits that are already watching out for us. When we start developing relationships with them, we don't have to worry so much about negative spirits coming after us because our team's going to be covering our back.
Yeah. Yeah.
We got to have you on again, Sally.
Great talking to you.
Yeah, it's been wonderful. Thanks so much. We'll send you a link. John, when is this one going up?
I think it'll be next Sunday. I think.
Okay.
I mean, yeah. We'll go with next Sunday because I already had something ready to go up today.
Okay.
So, how can people contact you?
Oh yeah, and where can they find your books?
They can find my books at any major bookseller, Amazon, Barnes and Nobles, Books A Million.
So you go by Salicrow, Salicrow. That's the name they can use.
My website is salicrow.com. So salicrow.com, salicrow.com. And you can find my services there, events in which I'm teaching, and as well as books and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah. Do you do telephone readings?
I do Zoom readings. I actually do readings, psychic readings, and spirit communication for people all over the world. I've done readings for people in 17 different countries.
Wow.
So, yeah, I've been doing this a while. And I do readings either Zoom, Skype. I do phone, but most people prefer to do video. But I also see people in person in my offices at the Pearl in St. Johnsbury, Vermont, which is my Psychic Artisans Guild and Educational Center. So I'm a busy gal.
That's great.
Yeah,
really. Plus, you're a mom.
Well, actually, I'm a grandma.
Grandmother. Oh, my God.
1.5-year-old grandchildren.
Oh, wow.
The mom part of me has already been that duty's done.
Okay. Now we're the grandchild face.
It was great talking with you.
Oh, just wonderful. Thanks so much. This has been
Enjoyed it.
great. Take care, Sally.
Thank you.
Bye now.
Thanks for joining the Mystical Underground. Visit www.themysticalunderground.com for the latest blog post and book info. Subscribe to the podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, Google Podcasts, or your favorite podcast app. Listen to the podcast at podcast.themysticalunderground.com. Follow Trish and Rob on Instagram at Trish and Rob McGregor. Follow us on Twitter at The Mystic Cast. Send email to podcast@themysticalunderground.com. And until next week, thank you for listening and stay mystical.